no one can be treated differently, discriminated based on their nationality, their ethnicity, or the color of their skin.
But in the meantime, we're seeing what is remarkable levels of kind of racism and hypocrisy from across Europe.
Hold on a second. The line that we're going in, it's all Black people, it's all Asian people, like Indian, dark complexion Indian people. But the other line was full of just white Ukrainians.
What had happened at the border of Ukraine wasn't racial, it was national. What had happened at the border of Ukraine wasn't racial, it was national. So if you were Ukrainian, you were fast-tracked because you can, okay? You're allowed to go into Europe. It was easier for them to manage it. On the other side, you had everybody else, and then they started splitting them up into different ethnic groups. I can't believe we still live in this world. When the hell is this going to end?
And you could tell when they had got to the border. I think Corinne had mentioned that she didn't realize that there was racial discrimination taking place until she got to the border in a car. There was a white Ukrainian family. She assumes they're Ukrainian, but again, you can't tell if someone's Ukrainian just by the color of their skin, right? But there was a white family in front of her and another white family behind her, and her husband and the other two individuals that she was traveling with were in a car. Now, they were asked by a civilian to come out of the car. So Corinne had asked why that was, but she just assumed that that was the process and the rest of the other people in the cars would be asked to come out as well. She was then told to go to a line. So this is now 4 days that she has been in this queue just to get to the front of the border. She's then told to go to a separate line where it's only full of people of color and Black people. The line had taken, she would have to go to the back of this line, which would then take her back to the point where she was 4 days ago. That is how long and stretched out this line was. That is when she realized that, hold on a second, the line that we're going in, it's all Black people, it's all Asian people, like Indian, dark complexion Indian people. But the other line was full of just white Ukrainians or white people, and they were being let through at such a quick speed. They were being given hospitality. They were being met with such empathy.
Let's stop looking at skin tones and beliefs and everything else and just, okay, what is the common ground we have? So what happened at the Ukrainian border was very unfortunate. I mean, the reason we met the Ukrainian ambassador was to say to her that it's not acceptable. She explained the position to us. She said, when 100,000 people descend on a border and nobody knows what to do, try and make it queues of understanding, not realizing that you're putting in queues of color.
These are the things that these students and these people are facing because of how media decides to portray what a refugee and what a Ukrainian national is. And I think it's important because people have a hard time understanding that concept. I'll give an analogy. I am a British citizen, right? And if you look at it, if we applied what's happening in Ukraine and said that the same had happened in Britain, I would be one of those people that would be othered because I'm British by nationality, but I am not white. I am not English, right? So I would go to the people of color line, despite the fact that I am British. So they weren't even taking care to check that the people of color or the people that were in those lines were Ukrainian residents or Ukrainian citizens. They didn't care. As long as you were Black or you were a person of color, that was the line that you would go in.
Amidst the millions of people that are being displaced as a result of the war, the numbers of people facing overt discrimination are relatively small. Of course, so are the number of African migrants or Indian migrants or others who are there. There's a tiny percentage of the people being displaced. That doesn't mean that the examples that people are citing are insignificant, and it doesn't mean that we should underestimate the overall challenge those kinds of people, whether they're from Ukraine or elsewhere in the world, face trying to access protection, trying to access safety, trying to reclaim their dignity within Europe.
And I think the media has unfortunately played a massive part in this and how these students are being treated when they cross over. I think very early on, when you saw the Western media, they were talking about how these refugees, they're like us. They have blonde hair, they have blue eyes, they're like our neighbor, they're middle class. You know, all the things that someone could possibly use to discriminate against another person, they were being discussed in media outlets. And very quickly, when these students were crossing over, if they did not meet that norm of what it means to be a Ukrainian refugee, they were ostracized, they were othered.
It wasn't acceptable. But they explained, they contacted the ground forces. They said, this is how it's going to happen now. And it seems to be quite calm across all the borders. You don't have this situation anymore of here is the Africans, there is the Europeans, there's the Europeans that aren't not Europeans, and there's the South African white Europeans. So they stopped that, and they realized, people are people. Everybody's just trying to get out and not be shelled by Russia.
There are, of course, people within Europe who are equally outraged by this, as they have been to the treatment of African or Middle Eastern refugees over the last few years. And I think we should also not forget that while Europe as a whole may not act as a political unit, may not act as we'd like, there are certainly people within those countries who are resisting and pushing for a more equitable and fair response.
Well, first of all, I want to quote our President von der Leyen, who said that Europe stands by all those in need of protection, and all those fleeing bombs are welcome in Europe, and will provide also the protection for all those seeking shelter. And in this particular case of foreign students, we have been in contact very actively with all member states, also Ukraine, but also Moldova, to ensure that the safe arrival of foreign students, but of any other third country nationals that were caught up in the war, were trying to flee war, are granted access to the EU that are able to transit through. And we have been also assured, because of course seeing, reporting, listening, we have raised this throughout, so that we make sure that everybody can come in without any restrictions. You might also know that Ukrainian authorities, being aware of this of the need and the special need also to communicate, they also have set an emergency hotline also to help African, Asian, and other students wishing to leave Ukraine. And you might also know there has been also a mission report by the EU's fundamental rights agencies. They have checked the EU-Ukraine borders, and the report highlights, the grand total, the general point is the tremendous solidarity towards all those fleeing the war as such, and did not observe any discrimination during their missions, but of course they were made aware of reporting, and also requested that all authorities are diligent to prevent such acts, and also that the civil society is encouraged to report any incidents which are intolerable for us.
I think what we've seen in the Ukraine crisis is many things. One is that within Ukraine, despite them now being undeniably the victims of Russian aggression, Ukraine itself has a long history of deep-seated racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and some of that has trickled to the surface, despite the fact that the president is of sort of Jewish background, despite the fact that they've made a lot of kind of universal appeals. There are deep issues within the country. We've also, of course, seen from Europe, and especially from Poland, the kind of racism come to the surface that has sort of been in denial for the last few years, with reactions to African and Middle Eastern migrants and refugees coming in, saying, look, we simply cannot have them. There's too many people. We're not equipped to cope with this sort of influx. And now all of a sudden they can handle millions in a matter of weeks. So, there's clearly hypocrisy there. There are debates about, what exactly is behind that and the kind of solidarities, but I think it'd be hard to say that there's not some racial, cultural, religious elements at play.
I think Europe has a long way to go. It really does. And the first thing that they need to do is, when they are doing this dealing with something like a crisis like Ukraine, don't have a transactional humanitarian perspective, right? If you are saying that something is waived for one person, let it be waived for all. And if you have to put things in place in order to verify a person's story, I don't think anybody has an issue with that. But to just put a blanket cover and say we're only assisting Ukrainian nationals, I don't think that's fair. And then to have Black Ukrainian nationals who have lived in Ukraine, who have Ukrainian citizenship, try to seek this help and further say to them, we can't actually confirm whether you are a Ukrainian citizen, so therefore we can't give you the help. Then how are you deciding that the white people are Ukrainian citizen? Because surely they are in the same predicament where they don't have the same documents or they don't have the same level of evidence. I guess their only evidence is their skin color.
I think there are philosophical questions here about how do we feel solidarity? Who do we owe solidarity to? Clearly, there's many instances where we reject people who look very similar to us. If you look at South Africa's response to immigration, clearly having even historical connections is not enough to guarantee welcome. But I think it is easier for people, and perhaps it is a natural human trait, to see in someone who looks like you, someone you see as like you, to feel empathetic, to feel their suffering in a way you don't, especially when that other is someone who has, for decades, if not centuries, been described to you as backwards, as different, as somehow unassimilable. So yes, I mean, I think that the Europeans will definitely feel a stronger connection to Ukrainians. And that's a connection that's been conditioned, not just by what we've seen recently, but by hundreds of years of colonial discourse and kind of racism that makes it harder to see Africans or people from the Middle East as humans also in need of help.
I can only give you also the Commission's position on this, which is crystal clear. And I'm really happy to reiterate it because I really believe in this. No one can be treated differently, discriminated based on their nationality, their ethnicity, or the color of their skin. And also this is enshrined in the EU law. The EU rules on asylum guarantee the same treatment for everybody. So there should be no discrimination if you're Ukrainian or anyone else coming from wherever, from, again, Africa or Middle East. Ukraine, in a way, it is a bit of a special case. And why? Because Ukrainians already had visa-free regime. This allowed them to already enter basically without restrictions, because they could come in and also move freely, not only in the first country of arrival, but they can go wherever they would wish within the EU. So I think this facilitated things in terms of registration and allowing them. That being said, for instance, if we compare this situation with the Syrian war, and where we had a lot of nationalities, but also Syrians, for instance, where also the Commission, while at that time, you might know, we triggered now for the first time the Temporary Protection Directive. At that time, we have used a mandatory relocation, for instance, to make sure that all those in need, all Syrians, all those in need that were fleeing war, that received the necessary protection as such. So at that time, also the mandatory relocation that was also in 2015 was an important historic decision also for the EU to grant all those needing the necessary protection.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the global image of a refugee is formed heavily by sort of images of the Rwandan genocide and hundreds of thousands of people in a camp in the mud in Western Tanzania or Congo. And those are the images that are mobilized by aid agencies. Those are the images that are mobilized to raise funding, to elicit fear or rather emotion. There are, of course, other images of refugees in the United States, of the refugee who's been the great hero who has come and started from nothing and rebuilt himself or herself. There are, if we go back further, of course, the current refugee regime, the laws, the frameworks come from the European refugee crisis of the 1940s. And if we go back, those refugees look very much like the refugees that we see today. But we think of them in different terms. We think of Europe now as a stable place, as a place without war. But of course, even just 15, 20 years ago in the Balkans, there were hundreds of thousands, if not millions of refugees, some with blue eyes and brown hair, many of sort of European looking background. And so I think, it's remarkable, despite the fact that Europeans and other people from that area have been refugees for the last 50 years as well, that we continue to see refugees as this desperate, poor, Black or brown person.
This is how they gain votes. This is how in Europe you gain votes. You tell them, we're going to stop the immigrants coming in. And you don't give context as to why these people are coming into these countries. What is it that they need? I don't think any person would choose to put their children on a boat, right? A boat, and cross over and potentially risk the lives of their children dying or themselves dying just because they want to live in Europe. It's a fantasy that has been created, and it's a false fantasy.
Despite having decades of immigration from Turkey, from North Africa, from Africa, elsewhere, Europe has yet to come to terms with what it means to not have a future that is white, a future that is Christian, a future that is sort of universally kind of middle class and social democratic. Things are changing in Europe. It is what we are seeing as a reactionary movement, as we've seen elsewhere in the world, trying to protect or reclaim a lost past or a mythical lost path. That's what led the UK into Brexit in an effort to protect British sovereignty, whatever that means. And that's the kind of movements that we're seeing in France, we're seeing certainly in Hungary. It is inevitable that Europe will diversify. It needs the labor. The economics of it will mean that people will continue to come. But in the meantime, we're seeing what is remarkable levels of kind of racism and hypocrisy from across Europe.
Maybe one more important thing to add in terms of managing migration as such. This is not just about Ukraine. This is about a holistic approach. We have the new pact on migration that we have adopted now. It's in September 2020, where we have proposed a comprehensive package also to ensure we have a strong and balanced migration and asylum system. So this has also brought a lot of investment, operational support to member states, but also new tools to manage this. And also more deeper cooperation with key partners, key external partners to address the migration goals. And we have also proposed specific legislation also on crisis situation. So we really hope progress can be made on this. Already progress is made, but I think this is a very good way to make sure that we are equipped to adequately respond for all situations as needed.